"Those are reserved for clients with purchasing history," he said, tone clipped. "Perhaps you'd like to see something more approachable." Althea Vance didn't blink. She had heard variations of that phrase her entire life. Same rhythm, same insult, just dressed differently. Still, her voice remained even. "I'll stay with this one." Barnaby Sterling studied her the way one might assess a stain on silk. A quick glance. Shoes too plain, jewelry too understated. He missed everything else. The sharp elegance of her posture, the deliberate stillness, the way she studied the pendant not with longing, but with discernment. Still, he pressed on. "It's a very rare piece. Not the kind we put on display for curiosity." Althea tilted her head, voice calm. "Is there a problem?" "No." Barnaby snapped, but his tone betrayed him. "Only that we've had incidents with browsers who couldn't commit." Across the room, the clinking of glassware quieted. Attention shifted. Althea's gaze didn't waver. "I'll stay with this one," she repeated. That was when Barnaby Sterling lost control of the moment, and of himself. He stepped forward, gestured toward another case. "Why don't we find something more in line with your expectations?" Stillness. Althea didn't move. In that stillness, something cracked, not in her, but in him. With no warning, his hand lashed out, striking her across the cheek. The sound rang out across the boutique. Sharp, brutal, immediate. A second passed before anyone breathed. Mouths opened. Eyes widened. No one stepped forward. Althea stood rooted. Her hand lifted to her face, slow and deliberate, brushing the sting without haste. She met his stare, not with shock, not with fear, with certainty. Barnaby shifted under her gaze. She didn't argue, didn't scold, just watched him the way someone might watch a clock run out of time. The room held its breath. Then she turned, calm steps toward the exit. One hand slipped into her coat pocket. The other held her phone, already recording. A man near the window raised his, too. No apology came. No staff intervened. The boutique, lined with velvet and silence, let her leave under the weight of its own stillness. Outside, her reflection passed across the glass. Inside, Barnaby stood rigid, watching a decision he couldn't take back. If you believe that no one's worth should be questioned based on their skin, their clothes, or your assumptions, type respect in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. What you just witnessed wasn't just about a necklace. It was about who gets seen and who gets slapped for being seen at all. The day had started without incident. Althea Vance stepped into Sterling and Company just after noon, drawn not by indulgence but by craft. Her outfit, sleek wool trousers, a muted blouse, and flats softened by wear, was intentional, understated, professional, the kind of look that moved through the world quietly. The receptionist glanced up, gave a stiff smile, then lowered her eyes to the tablet. No greeting. Althea was used to that. She made her way to the center display, a rotating case of heirloom pieces chosen for their exclusivity. It was there she first noticed a sapphire pendant, set in platinum, delicately flanked by diamonds. It wasn't just beautiful. It was rare, balanced, a piece chosen by someone who valued precision over flash. That's when she felt it, the subtle shift, the kind of silence that follows you, not around you. Barnaby Sterling emerged from a back corridor, hand behind his back, shoes polished to a mirror. He gave the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Afternoon," he said. "Looking for a gift?" Althea turned slightly. "I'm looking for pieces in the high-end collection." He blinked, then gestured toward a different section. "We have some lovely options with similar styles, more accessible price points." She held his gaze. "I prefer to start here." Barnaby hesitated. "This one's a showpiece," he said, tapping the glass. "Reserved for clients we know personally." She nodded once. "I'll stay with this one." The temperature shifted again. Within minutes, a floor associate began tidying unnecessarily near her. A security guard appeared near the watch counter, suddenly vigilant. Another associate whispered something behind a cupped hand before stepping away with a smirk. Althea, pretending not to notice, moved on to a pair of earrings displayed nearby, but the judgment followed. She asked to see the sapphire necklace up close. Barnaby didn't reach for the key. Instead, he crossed his arms. "It's priced well into 5 figures," he said. "We've had browsers before. People just curious. That's not what we're here for." Her response was level. "I'm not curious. I'm deciding." Retail profiling is rarely loud. It's a lowered voice, a subtle angle of the body, a clerk shadowing your path for no reason, a product recommendation based on stereotypes, not interest, and always the pressure to prove that you belong. This wasn't new to Althea. She'd seen it when she was 9, watching her mother be questioned over a fitting room key. She'd seen it as a teen, asked for extra ID when her friends weren't. She'd seen it as a successful adult, asked again and again, "Are you sure you can afford this?" before the conversation ever started. Today, the pattern was the same. Barnaby scanned her face, her bag, her shoes. She folded her arms and waited. He leaned in. "I'm just trying to avoid any misunderstandings." Althea smiled faintly. The misunderstanding is already underway. Around them, the employees didn't hide it anymore. One walked by slowly, glancing at her purse. Another stood behind a pillar, watching. Barnaby's tone sharpened. "This is a store with a reputation to uphold." Althea nodded. "Exactly." That single word, measured unshaken, was the crack he couldn't tolerate. She wasn't loud. She wasn't rude. She simply refused to shrink. And that refusal, in his mind, was the offense. Long before Althea Vance walked into Sterling and Company, she had walked through countless doors that warned her, wordlessly, that she didn't belong. She was 9 the first time she understood it. Her mother had taken her shopping for a dress. The store wasn't especially upscale, but the tension arrived anyway. A clerk had blocked the fitting room, claiming it was closed for cleaning. Minutes later, a white mother and daughter were ushered in without pause. Althea remembered the way her mother smiled tightly and said nothing, choosing instead to hold her daughter's hand a little firmer. That quiet strength made its mark. Her mother didn't raise her to chase acceptance. She raised her to know her worth long, before anyone else recognized it. Growing up, Althea saw how respect was offered on a scale she was never meant to qualify for. She learned to anticipate the double takes, the coded language, the second-guessing of her achievements. Her academic records were questioned more often than celebrated. If she was confident, she was labeled aggressive. If she was reserved, she was considered incapable. Mediocrity was never an option. She knew that walking into any room as a black woman meant being seen as either invisible or too visible. Both burdens, both exhausting. But she learned. She learned to speak clearly without softening the truth. She learned when to challenge a comment and when silence said more. She watched her parents move through the world with dignity, even when it wasn't returned. Her father, a self-taught craftsman who repaired watches with precision and pride, often told her, "Master the details. That's where people expose their assumptions and where you show your brilliance." Althea carried that mindset into every room she entered. In college, she excelled without fanfare. While others networked over connections they inherited, she built hers from scratch. Classmates, professors, professionals who saw not just her ambition, but her preparation. She found mentors who saw her potential, and allies who respected her refusal to be reduced. In her early career, she met every expectation and exceeded the ones never intended for her. But the higher she climbed, the more she encountered what others rarely named: the broken rung. The first promotion that's rarely offered. The critical feedback that somehow felt personal. The meetings where her ideas were praised only after someone else repeated them. Still, she rose. She observed patterns others missed. She anticipated the backlash that came from being both capable and unapologetic. She refined her instincts, not just as a defense mechanism, but as a leadership trait. Every skip recognition taught her to move strategically. Every overlooked success taught her to document everything. Her strength wasn't loud. It was cumulative. What truly grounded her was a network she cultivated beyond the office. Black women across industries who exchanged resources, insight, and encouragement with precision and care. They weren't just a support system. They were a power structure. Those connections reinforced something vital. She wasn't climbing for herself alone. Althea also understood consumer behavior in a way few executives did. She knew what it meant to be excluded from marketing campaigns, yet be expected to spend. She understood the irony of being ignored by the brand she contributed to keeping afloat. That contradiction shaped her vision. Power was not just about position. It was about redefining who belonged in positions of influence. By the time she entered the upper echelons of luxury retail, Althea wasn't just a strong candidate. She was a strategic force, disciplined, intuitive, and aware of every lens aimed at her. She'd long stopped trying to fit the mold. Instead, she focused on reshaping the space around her. So when Barnaby Sterling questioned her presence that day, what he didn't see was the full weight of the woman standing in front of him, a woman whose composure was built across decades, a woman shaped by erasure, but never erased. Sterling and Company wasn't just a boutique, it was a crown jewel. Its parent company, Aurelian Holdings, owned a portfolio of luxury brands spanning fashion, jewelry, cosmetics, and home design. On paper, the empire still looked formidable, but beneath the polish, pressure was building. Quarterly numbers had been soft for over a year, and international expansion had stalled mid-launch. A poorly handled influencer partnership sparked weeks of negative headlines. Internally, morale was low, and turnover at the top had become routine. The CEO, Richard Belgrave, once hailed as a visionary, had grown distant, more reactive than strategic. The board had started asking quiet questions. Still, the company had survived worse. Until that clip surfaced. It was short, under 30 seconds, but damning. Barnaby Sterling's hand, Althea's face, the sound, her silence, the tension in the boutique, the camera shaking slightly as someone whispered, "Did he just slap her?" The video spread fast. By the next morning, it had been reposted on every major platform. Fashion blogs, business journals, even national outlets ran versions of the same headline. Luxury jeweler attacks black woman in store dispute. At first, the company released a one-paragraph statement expressing regret for any discomfort caused. It made things worse. The backlash was immediate. Customers threatened boycotts. Influencers severed partnerships. Internal group chats among Aurelian employees exploded with disbelief and anger. And behind it all, in silent corridors and private boardrooms, a question was forming. Who was the woman? It didn't take long to find out. By the second news cycle, the story had shifted again. Althea Vance, Aurelian executive, head of strategic growth and acquisitions, Ivy League credentials, multi-brand turnaround record, a woman known inside the company for precision, decisiveness, and quiet authority. The narrative flipped. This wasn't just about public humiliation. This was a company attacking its own leadership. The board convened an emergency session. The PR team begged for direction. Legal scrambled to contain the damage. Shareholders demanded answers. Behind the scenes, Althea moved quickly. She reached out to key allies. She presented not a complaint, but a proposal, a complete framework for stabilizing the brand, rebuilding trust, and reshaping the company's identity. Her documents were detailed. Her plan addressed not just Sterling and Company, but the entire cultural disconnect at the heart of Aurelian's problems. Some board members were stunned by her readiness. Others were relieved. It wasn't a slap that fractured the company. It was what revealed a leadership vacuum, a tone-deaf response system, and a failure to reflect the people it hoped to sell to. What followed wasn't a conversation about optics. It was a reckoning. Althea didn't ask for sympathy. She offered solutions. While the public demanded accountability, while headlines called for consequences, while the company's image buckled under scrutiny, she stood steady. Her message to the board was simple. This is not just a scandal. This is your opportunity to change direction. I'm ready to lead. And for the first time in weeks, the room wasn't filled with panic. It was filled with silence. Then came the nods, the votes, and the decision. The air outside Sterling and Company was still, but inside the store, tension had teeth. Reporters lined the velvet curtains. Flashbulbs sparked. Employees stood stiffly behind polished counters. Several of the same patrons who had witnessed the incident had returned, drawn by whispers and headlines. A low murmur filled the space. Some expected an apology. Others expected a scripted statement, issued by someone 2 rungs removed from responsibility. They didn't expect her. Althea Vance stepped through the main entrance with quiet precision. This time, she wasn't approached. No one offered substitutions. No one blocked her path. She didn't need introduction. Every face turned. Barnaby Sterling, tucked near the edge of the main display, froze. He looked at her, then toward the cameras, as if waiting for someone to step in to reverse what was clearly unfolding. None came. Althea walked to the podium. No theatrics. Just presence. Just control. "Good afternoon," she said. "My name is Althea Vance, and I am the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of Aurelian Holdings, the parent company of Sterling and Company." The room stilled. In recent days, this store became the site of a deeply troubling event. An event not isolated, but rooted in long-standing patterns many have the luxury to ignore. A few reporters exchanged glances. The employees stood even straighter. What occurred here wasn't just an outburst. It was a reflection of culture gone unchecked, a behavior tolerated far too long. Today, that ends. She turned slightly. Her eyes met Barnaby's. Effective immediately, Barnaby Sterling has been terminated from all roles and associations with this company. The silence was sudden and sharp. "This decision is not about punishment," she continued. "It is about responsibility." She paused to let that distinction settle. "We are implementing mandatory anti-bias education across all Aurelian brands. We're launching a third-party equity audit to examine not only how we hire, but how we serve. Policies are being rewritten. Leadership expectations are being redefined. We are rebuilding from the foundation." Althea looked directly at the cameras. And to every customer, employee, and community member who saw themselves in that video, not as bystanders, but as former recipients of that same treatment, this moment is for you. She stepped back from the podium for a breath. Not to gather composure. She hadn't lost any. But to give the room space to understand the gravity of what they'd just heard. Her words hadn't been filled with rage. She hadn't named herself as a victim. She didn't need to. She had rewritten the ending. For those watching at home, it wasn't just satisfying. It was instructive. Barnaby Sterling, once the gatekeeper, now stood off to the side, unsure what to do with his hands, his expression, or his future. Meanwhile, Althea had done more than remove him. She had named the system that created him and begun dismantling it. This wasn't a reversal. This was a realignment. A reminder that power, when rooted in principle, doesn't shout. It speaks clearly and then gets to work. Months passed, but the shift was unmistakable. Under Althea Vance's leadership, Aurelian Holdings no longer resembled the corporation it had been before the incident at Sterling and Company. The change wasn't cosmetic. It wasn't a marketing campaign. It was cultural. Luxury, in Althea's view, had never been about price tags. It was about presence. And for too long, entire communities have been kept outside the gates of industries built on their influence. That changed. She introduced mentorship pipelines connecting young Black professionals to senior leaders across fashion, jewelry, and branding. Partnering with historically overlooked designers, Althea opened Aurelian's platforms to new voices that had never been given space to lead. She shifted supplier relationships toward Black-owned ateliers, expanded campaigns to reflect real-world diversity, and invested in education programs that taught staff the cost of bias, not just in ethics, but in lost potential. Sterling and Company itself underwent a full transformation, gone were the velvet ropes designed to signal who belonged. In their place, open design, storytelling plaques highlighting cultural contributions to jewelry making, and rotating exhibitions celebrating artistry from across the African diaspora. The market responded. What traditional leaders once treated as a risk, centering inclusivity in a legacy brand, proved to be a competitive advantage. Sales climbed. Customer loyalty deepened. Press coverage turned from scandal to case study. But for Althea, the metrics were secondary. Her reward wasn't a stock rebound. It was watching a teenage girl walk into a boutique like Sterling and Company, head held high, not because she had something to prove, but because she no longer needed to explain her presence. She'd seen too many faces dimmed by dismissal, too many shoulders tightened by quiet judgment. She understood the invisible weight people carried into certain spaces, and what it meant to finally set it down. In interviews, Althea often refused to center herself. "This story isn't mine alone," she said. "It belongs to every person who's been looked through, every person who's been asked to prove they deserve decency." But one quote stayed with people. It showed up on placards, newsletters, even storefronts. "Respect isn't earned by your wallet. It's a birthright." That line wasn't crafted in a boardroom. It came from lived experience, from being doubted, dismissed, and ultimately underestimated. It came from a woman who was once told a necklace wasn't for her, and who now shaped the future of the company that sold it. Her rise became more than a redemption arc. It became a blueprint, showing that leadership built on truth could not only survive, but thrive. That dignity and strategy were not opposites. That visibility, when aligned with purpose, could break open industries, not just for one, but for many. The moment that started with a slap had ended in something deeper: change. What had begun as humiliation became healing, not only for Althea, but for a company, a culture, and a generation ready to inherit both.